Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Product Ball podcast. Today we have a data science leader who has, tremendous amount of experience leading a data science team, coming up as an individual contributor, and then moving on, now to lead a data science team. Luigi Patruno, the VP of Data Science at 2U. Luigi, welcome to the Product Ball podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Harini. Really appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here.
The last time we met was when Luigi came to our company, a startup called Capsulate, to give a talk. I think it was on machine learning in production based on your very famous newsletter. But now it was like 5 years back, and now your career graph has like really exploded. Could you give us a little bit of introduction on your background and yeah.
Yeah, sure, happy to do it. Like you mentioned, I'm currently the vice president of data science at a company called 2U, and I lead the data science department there. And the team is composed of data scientists, ML engineers, product analysts, and product managers. And essentially, what the team does is help other stakeholder groups within the company optimize their operations through building machine learning systems, through experimentation, through data analysis. And we've built systems and run experiments and conducted many analyses for various stakeholder groups within the company. So some of our major stakeholders are the marketing team, the product management organization, our admissions groups, and various other teams within the company. So you can really think of data science at 2U as a sort of internal data science consulting shop, where we help these other business units achieve their goals.
Awesome. So I think this is actually a great topic for up and coming data scientists who are having an opportunity to either join as a data scientist in a core product team versus in a consulting position. So is that one that is better to start a career
Sure.
with, or what are your thoughts?
So it's interesting. Data science is a really rapidly changing discipline, right? Even the name data science didn't exist up until about a decade ago, although some of the types of work that a data scientist does today in industry, different employees with different named roles would have been doing prior to a decade ago. But I think for a new graduate, my best advice would be to join a company, if you want to be a data scientist, to join a company that already has a thriving data science practice, that already has an established team. Because in a job like that, you'll actually get a wide range of experience of different problems to work on, different areas of a business to work on. And this is a big advantage over joining, for instance, a startup that may be hiring their first or second data scientist.
Right.
I think that's often a trap that data scientists fall into, in that if you join a startup and you're number one or number two data scientist, it's very likely that you won't actually be doing any, quote unquote data science work. Right. If you classify that as like building machine learning models or designing, analyzing experiments, you may have to do much more data engineering style work, ingesting, cataloging, warehousing data sets, right. Or you may be working on dashboarding, for instance, sort of business intelligence type work. All of these things are very important, but they sort of get lumped into data science, the data science category, by folks who aren't as familiar with data science or who have just more pressing needs.
Right.
The only caveat to that, I think, is where data science is a core part of the core product that a startup may be building, right? Mm-hmm. So if you could imagine a company that's building a product for consumers or for enterprises that really requires the use of machine learning, for instance, and you get a job working on that core product at that company, that's one example or one counter example to my advice. where you
Right.
would be sort of getting in on the ground floor and doing machine learning or whatever other sort of data science method
Right.
that you're interested in pursuing.
No, so those are like, I think that's a great advice. And incidentally, I was the first data scientist at a startup. And I can totally understand what you're saying. We generally don't have any data or anything to start with. So it's more of an engineering work at the beginning, more like a software engineering work before, at least a year before you actually start doing data science work. So absolutely. So a tangent question here. This is based on, a lot of, attritions that you're seeing right now, a lot of, restructuring and layoffs and everything. You do see, a bunch of data science folks being part of it. And the question comes, how do you show value? How do you show business value to which is ultimately a research like job, right? So in a lot of teams, data science starts from, like, you start with the research statement, and then so in those situations, like, what's your advice, I would say, like.
Yeah, so I would actually start by pushing back on something you said, which is that typically data science is a sort of research type role. I think
Okay.
that really depends on the company. And what I've sought to do in my career is
Mhm.
to move further and further away from research and
Right.
closer and closer to applied pressing business problems
Right.
where um, achieving a solution to the problem is critical for the
Right.
business.
Right.
And in that setting, it's significantly easier to demonstrate value than it would be if you were pursuing a sort of open-ended research question. I think if you
Absolutely.
want to pursue those sorts of questions, you need to look for specific types of jobs at specific types of companies,
Right.
right? So, a company like Google, Facebook that have research labs where those
Hmm.
unit, Microsoft, those units are specifically created with the intent of long-term research. I
Right.
think if you're, you know, and those are a small subset of the companies that are out there. If
Hmm.
you're in if you're in most other companies, you want to be closest to the action. You want to be closest to the money,
Right.
right? Either that is revenue generation or cost efficiencies through improving the spending profile of those companies.
Right.
And that's a good place to be for a data scientist because there's many opportunities to increase top line revenue or improve profitability through data science techniques. I mean,
Right.
at the end of the day, a lot of these things are a lot of the things that get developed by data scientists are aimed at like improving something, right? So how do
Right.
we improve? How do we improve targeting? How do we improve the user experience through some product that we're developing?
Right.
How do we make some process more efficient?
Right.
And those are all questions that are trying to optimize the business in some way. So, my advice there in terms of quantifying your value is first of all, seek out problems for which there is a potential to generate value,
Correct.
right?
Right.
And then work as hard as you can on solving those problems and quantify the actual impact you have, either through experiments, if you can run controlled experiments, or through sort of analysis of previous behavior or previous patterns and new patterns in the new world.
Right.
But in my opinion, data science is one of the actually simplest or types of jobs that it's the simplest to demonstrate values if you're actually working on the right problems, because experimentation and causal inference is our data science techniques today.
Awesome. That's very well put. So yeah, so I'm curious to know from your journey from individual contributor to a data science leader, what are some of the lessons learned? Good and bad. Like, what are the top three
Sure.
lessons each? I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of that transition, it's important for me to say that transition was very personal for me in the sense that I
Hmm.
wanted to go into management,
Right.
right? That was always something that I knew, either subconsciously or consciously, but I
Right.
wanted to be leading a team,
Mm-hmm.
managing a team of people. I really enjoy decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy thinking through problems in an end-to-end way.
Right.
I really enjoy making things efficient and getting like a lot done. And I
Okay.
think, those are, I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed, for instance, like the technical work involved in being, hands on the keyboard, developing
Right.
models and that sort of thing.
Right.
I still do a lot of analysis today in a lot of different ways, but I haven't been hands on the keyboard as a data scientist in some time.
Right.
So, the transition for me was something I desired. And I think, one of the big takeaways is unless you want to be a manager and want to be leading, you shouldn't consider that the default path if you want to grow in your career, right?
Okay.
So if you want to be an individual contributor,
Mm-hmm.
there are many companies where you can work at, where you can be a very senior individual contributor and
Right.
make a lot of money, have increased compensation, have um, a lot of prestige in the job because that job is prestigious at the company. And it's important for you to understand, what you actually want to do.
Right.
So don't go into management because you think that's the way to get ahead.
Right. Right.
Management is a very, very different job than being an individual contributor. One is not better than the other, but they're just
Right.
very different things and they should be considered different paths.
Okay.
That said, plenty of people sort of jump back and forth between the two paths because it's
Right.
interesting.
Okay.
I personally am not interested in being an individual contributor again. I really enjoy management. The second thing is to get as wide of an experience as possible, especially early on in your career,
Okay.
right? But something that's interesting about data science is you can, data science is just a methodology or a set of methodologies, tools, and you bring these to bear on specific problems. So there are many different types of problems,
Right.
and there are many different types of ways of solving those problems.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can get a lot of varied experience by working on different problem sets. And,
Right.
one way of doing that is to, change jobs early in career, if that makes sense for
Mm-hmm.
you.
Right.
Although I think that there's a lot of value in staying working for a single company for an extended period of time.
Right.
Another way of doing that, I think, is to get a job at maybe a consulting company
Mm-hmm.
where you can see a lot of different types of problems. Um, and data science to me is very interesting. And one of the reasons I came to 2U is
Mm-hmm.
you can really learn about every different area of the business because
Right.
today every area of the business generates some sort of data.
Right.
There are sort of technologies and source systems that create these data sets, and you can use that to improve your operations, get results that you're seeking to get. So it's a very interesting way of learning about business through a technical lens, right? I came from a
Right.
technical background. I studied math and computer science. I had no business training whatsoever.
Right.
And my job has allowed me to learn a lot about business through collaboration with these different departments.
Right.
So getting a wide ranging experience is very, very interesting because it allows you to actually, through experience, determine what you like to do or where you'd like to focus. And that can
Right.
be a great platform for then more specialization later on in your career if you
Right.
prefer that. And it's also, if you don't prefer specialization and you want to be a generalist, then you're also already being a generalist
Right.
doing that thing.
Yeah, so were there any like aha moments, like once you became like a manager of, say, a larger team, were there certain things that you did not expect, like any example?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, coming from not managing, everything
Hmm.
was brand new.
Okay.
So one of the assumptions that I think I certainly had as a manager, but I think a lot of other people, I've also grown managers and
Right.
first time managers and see their
Right.
experiences and have, relate to them in these ways, um, is that everybody is not like you.
Right.
And typically, typically people who become managers, or not typically, but I think oftentimes individual contributors who become managers are those individual contributors who are very high performers, right? And that means they were always getting their work done to very, high levels of ability. They never need, they rarely needed to be reminded of things to do. They, rarely missed assignments or that sort of thing. Whenever they made a mistake, they're quick to acknowledge it and fix it, that sort of thing. And, the reality is not everybody is like that for some reason or another. And as a manager, you need to be ready to coach and advise and grow other employees who may not be as performant on all of those sort of attributes. Right. So, you'll have to get used to repeating the same message, right? You may be somebody who hears something one time and it's locked in the vault. Other folks need to hear it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? Before the message really gets there. And you can't let that discourage you, because the person may not be doing anything wrong. They just need more repetition of that particular phrase. And as your team gets larger and larger, you're dealing with an exponentially growing number of different personalities. Right. So you have to really get used to that if you want to be able to grow. And not only is each individual different and potentially very different, but then their interaction, the number of interactions possible there and interacting personalities is very different. So I think you have to be very interested in people if you want to be a manager, and you have to be open to really being uncertain in a lot of different situations and just doing sort of the best you can. I'm very interested in people, which, I tend to view teams as just engineering problems, with wider uncertainty bands around the outcomes. And, so for me, it's an interesting problem, but it's certainly, if you're a technical engineer or data scientist and you're used to very, closed form solutions where you get the answer, it's correct or not, that's not how management works.
I think your one line kind of summarized the entire message, which is you need to be interested in people. Yes. I think a nice segue, the next question would be, if you're a data science manager who is starting to build a team from scratch, what would be your ideal composition of the team? And the reason for my question is, I think, data science, the entire domain has tremendously changed from, say, 5 years back to now. Now it's a lot more software engineering focused. Most of the data science roles that you see, you need to have like a very good software engineering background. And there's been a lot of debates on, a number of engineers versus, for like, how many data scientists, and then do you need a product manager? So yeah, your thoughts on if you're going to build a team from scratch, how would you conceptualize that?
Yeah, so it's very context dependent, and it totally depends on what you're seeking to do as a team, right? So I would actually start by very concretely formalizing what your strategy and goals are, right? So if you're seeking, for instance, to build a team that's going to help develop a core part of the product, then that's going to tell you very likely that you need a particular set of skills. These people may need some software engineering experience. You may need some product management within the team to help have the product management conversations. But that's very different than, for instance, if you're building a team that's essentially going to investigate like some sort of growth opportunities, right? There, you may not need any software engineering. You may need people who are very good at analyzing data and coming up with hypotheses. And your team may be very heavy on like analyst types who can work in notebooks, but they're not going to build any pipelines for you. Right. Now, if you have a team that's going to do both of those things, then that's going to tell you a different set of skills that you need. But the first step is having your goals in mind, right? So if you don't know what you're seeking to do, there is no ideal composition, because every composition is going to be wrong. Basically,
Right.
you have no goals in mind, right? So
Right.
like the first step is to really understand what your goals are.
Mm-hmm.
Your goals may be to be focused on experimentation, not be concerned about predictive analytics at all. In which case, that tells you about the types of data scientist competencies you want to develop. So start with knowing your goals, and then from there you can design the team structure and competencies. First you talk about the competencies that you need, and then you can think about, all right, how are those competencies distributed amongst different types of employees? And that tells you sort of the composition of the team you're going to need. But outside of that, there's no sort of structure in general that is best.
Right. No, that's awesome. So now, as you see, the title of our podcast is Product Bulb. So, product has been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. I've been in data science for more than 7 years now. Nowadays, a lot of the companies have made it more structured. They have AI product managers now. A lot of roles are coming up. So your thoughts on, have you, seen this, experienced this before, or I'm sure, as you said now, your team has a product manager and stuff. So how important do you consider a product manager, or existence of a product strategy for a data team, for a data science team, and your experience on what you have seen out there so far, and pros and cons of having, not having?
Yeah, we have a team of product managers within our data science team, and it's been extremely important to the success of data science at 2U.
Right.
And that's because a lot of the work that our team does is in building end-to-end solutions for our stakeholders. Right. So we might let's say we're building some predictive models to help marketing. We not only build the models, but then we integrate those models into our software ecosystem. We build pipelines and systems that generate predictions and send those predictions to downstream consuming systems. Not only that, but we really act sort of as like I said, as a consulting shop. So we go to a lot of stakeholders and we say, hey, what are your priorities? What are the types of problems that you're seeking to solve? And let's try to think together in terms of what a solution could look like, and whether or not data science could be a helpful partner for you. And that's where the product managers are most important, is in having those conversations with our stakeholders, is in formulating a strategy for how to tackle those problems. And then the PMs work with our technical leads, data science, machine learning, engineering, to actually design what a solution could look like, architect a solution, and then to actually do the delivery, to build that system, to validate the hypotheses. So if we didn't have a product manager there, our technical leads would have to do that work, right? And that would be inefficient in the sense of they would have less time to work on the actual building and delivery and architecture, and have to spend more time on connecting the non-technical and the technical pieces. So I actually read a very interesting article from I think MIT Review a couple of weeks ago, called like the data science connector roles. And a lot of it was actually about data science product management. And how important basically these product managers are in terms of connecting the business problem and the technical solution. So to me, it's very important to have these PMs if you're a data science team that builds things. If you're focused only on analysis or on analyzing experiments, you may not need, or if you have data scientists that are embedded within other functioning sort of agile groups or agile teams with engineers and designers, you may not need a dedicated data science product manager. But if you operate sort of in a more centralized model, I think it's extremely useful to have a product manager in the picture, specifically for data science.
Definitely, yeah. I totally agree with you, and uh, I think most of my articles or research has been on why you need a product strategy, because what you're building is a data product. At the end of the day, you're building something to you know uh, relieve a customer pain point or add business value. So the next question is regarding a few points that I got from like surveys, which is siloed data teams. Like, what do you think are the reasons why some of the data teams become siloed?
So data scientists are typically very technical people, and they really enjoy the technical part of the work. It's
Right,
exciting, it's unique, and it's novel. And I think that's what attracts a lot of people to the career,
right,
especially if you're coming from academia. Maybe you hit a PhD or you're involved in research style work. You might
right,
think, oh, this is an industry type position where I get to use my statistics knowledge and modeling knowledge. That seems
right,
like it would be a worthwhile transition for me.
right,
The If you build a team of such people, I think chances are very likely that you won't have much success,
right,
um, because of the silo question that you're bringing up.
right.
From the outside, let's say you're on a different team, the data science team will be very intimidating to you,
Yeah,
right? It has
right,
all of these like really smart academic type people who speak
right,
a language that you don't really understand that well, and that's one factor that can lead to being a silo, is that there's just sort of this intimidation. From the other end of the perspective, the data scientists could feel that the folks in other areas of the business don't appreciate their work. They don't appreciate the data scientist's effort, and they're working on something really cool and it could potentially be groundbreaking. So there's factors on both sides that can lead to
right,
the silo, right? And that needs to be acknowledged. Um, in my opinion, there's sort of two important things. One is, why does the company have a data science team? Right? I always go back to this, but like, what's the strategy and the goals of the data science team? And
right,
if that is dictated from above, if in the executive room there is a decision that we're going to build a data science function to help us achieve particular goals, then I think that's one of the things that can help break down silos, right?
right.
In the absence of such a structure, such a mandate
Hmm.
from the top down, I think it could be really difficult, not impossible, but very difficult for silos not to come about. The
Right,
second, the second really comes from within data science itself, and the data science team needs to understand that they are secondary in
right,
all questions, right? Um, the data science team winning doesn't really mean anything, right?
right, right,
What's important has to be you helping these other parts of the business achieve their goals. So
right.
I like to use the term like strategic partners
Hmm.
or partner servants,
Right,
um, partners in service, and the way you know approach other teams, and doing so always with the lens of like, how can we provide you value? How can we
right.
help your team succeed? I
Hmm.
think is very helpful in tearing down the silos. But
Right,
it requires that you really speak the other person's language,
right.
right? And that again is where having data science product managers can be very helpful, right? In
Absolutely. Right,
being the sort of interface role between a business problem and then a team of technical people to solve that problem. But if you come in talking about model AUC and
right,
binary classifiers and this sort of stuff, you're not going to get very far. I think you're just actually going to
right,
isolate yourself. And you're going to
right,
make it very difficult to work with your group.
right,
So, having people that are going to these other teams and building and cultivating relationships over time is very important. And
right,
very realistically, even the individual contributors need to be very aligned with that being part of the role.
Right.
When I hire and people ask me, what are the important factors in the data scientists or the ML engineers that you hire, the number one factor I say is uh, the willingness to solve business problems.
Right.
That's the number one factor.
Right.
The number two factor is technical competency and
Right.
willing to learn. But the number
Right.
one is the focus on providing business value. Because
Absolutely.
I don't think you can take somebody who just wants to work on research and have that person be productive in an applied setting. I think you
Right.
really need somebody who is very fascinated and desires helping the business to succeed.
No, absolutely. I think you're, like on point when you talked about, one of the roles of product manager is to, develop that influence of data science teams to, the other teams. And yeah, I think every data scientist now, it's a unique role where you should be able to do the storytelling and, and bring the business value, like as you said. Excellent. So the next question is actually from a very practical experience regarding budgeting. I think this is something that you don't think about when you are an individual contributor, but then probably becomes one of the most important tasks as a data science manager. And I have seen, like when you're leading a data science team, and especially now when you have like hundreds of tools for different for training, for inference, you have all the managed machine learning services. You have like different databases that can stitch to your existing architecture. So how do you go about okay, so this is the X amount of budget. um, how do you plan for the entire team? And a secondary question to that is, what happens if someone in your team, say, runs a bad query and ends up costing a lot of money? So what are the guardrails, like as a data leader, that you think even before like the project starts? Like, are there any
Mhm.
guardrails, your advice on from your experience? Has something gone really bad, then you had to fix it later? Yeah.
Yeah, on the second question, I can tackle that one right away, and it's not really a problem I have to worry much about because
Okay.
we have a separate data engineering, data infrastructure group,
Okay.
and they really handle the budgeting for like Snowflake queries, for example. Um,
Exactly.
so so they set the guardrails, and we play within
Okay.
their sandbox,
Okay.
right? So and I don't have experience doing that on my own, so
Okay.
my answer would be to have a really good data engineering
Data
team that does
engineering
that.
team.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
So, but in terms of budgeting for in general for the team, that's the responsibility of any sort of like department lead, or so it's not just data science, but
Right.
um, you know, I think one of the things that happens is that, again, because you have technical people who, everybody's on Substack or Medium reading technical blog posts and seeing about new tools, and everybody's interested in trying out new tools.
Right.
Um, you know, I think that's one of the major differences between the ICs and the managers, right? The IC sees the new tool and is like, oh, I'm super excited to try this. The
Right.
manager sees the new tool and says, this is going to be really expensive, and it's going to add risk, and we
Right.
probably shouldn't do this type of thing, right? So
Right.
again, I'll just point to like, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and
Right.
you pick tools based on the problems that they're going to solve. We don't try to bring in vendors just because they're interesting or new.
Right.
If we have a problem, and solving this problem is going to generate X amount of dollars, or cut X amount of spend,
Mm-hmm.
then that allows you to determine whether it's important to make a certain financial investment to solve that problem,
Right.
right? So you need to understand what the problem you're trying to solve is, and how much value you're creating by solving that problem, and that tells you whether or not you should bring in a different tool.
Right.
Um, otherwise, in terms of budgeting, there's things that you have to plan for. So, for example, if you're you should be able to do a look a year ahead and say, what am I going to do, right? Do I want to have some money for, budgeted like learning, right? Courses or conferences or that sort of thing. And I know that's typically the first line item that gets cut if there's
Right.
budgetary constraints, right?
Right.
But fortunately, there's a lot of very inexpensive or free options for learning
Absolutely.
that don't require you to take spend $5,000 on a conference for a single person or that sort of thing between,
Right.
the travel and expenses. There's a lot of things online. There's free courses. There's inexpensive courses. So learning doesn't have to be an expensive thing.
Right.
The biggest line item is going to be salary, right?
Right.
And it's expensive. It's very expensive to hire new people, both in terms of the salary that you need to pay the new person, but also in terms of the cost you have to spend in terms of interviewing, onboarding,
Right.
and having that person be productive,
Right.
So it costs a bunch of money to get somebody to the productivity stage. So if you have a good set of people on your team, you don't want to lose those people, right? You want to retain them to the extent possible. One, because they have a lot of knowledge in their heads. Two, you already have a lot of trust and working relationships so that you can work smoothly with one another. And then three, because you don't have to pay for them to be productive. They're already productive, right? So, I think it's important to really think through your compensation schemes for data scientists, ML engineers, whomever. And this is not just data scientists, this is just across the board, right? If skilled employees are an important part of your strategy, and certainly they are for data science, then you need an organizational imperative, an organizational strategy on how you're going to retain employees. I read a really good, I'm kind of in the middle of this management book, and one of the points in the introductory chapter is like, what makes an effective manager? And there's 2 points. There's 2 points that makes an effective manager according to this book, and I tend to agree with both of them. The one is that the manager gets results.
Okay.
Right? If you don't get results, you're ineffective.
Right.
The second one, and I had never thought about it this way, but I loved it, is that you retain your employees.
Okay.
And those are the two sort of marks by which managers can be judged: is do you get results and do you retain employees? Right? Because if you get results but you don't retain employees, you're getting results really ineffectively. And if you retain your employees but you don't get results, well, you're not very useful for the business. So if you keep those two things in mind, then that forces you to think about, okay, well, how do I get results and how do I retain my employees? And I think a big part of retaining your employees is thinking about compensation, thinking about the work environment, thinking about allowing for growth opportunities. But compensation is key. So it's good to always have budgeted some amount of money for retention-related incentive in case one of your employees is doing a great job and you want to reward them, or in case one of your employees is talking about leaving and you want to help be able to keep them around. That's often very helpful, I think.
That is a very useful point. I think I think the entire session would be really useful for up and coming data science leaders, I guess. So I think probably a good time to go to the end of the podcast. The last question, which is probably the hardest question right now, and no better person to answer than someone who's leading a data science team. There's an explosion of events and advances happening in the generative AI space, and you having been in the data science field for so long, and so how do you, as a leader, I know there are a lot of company leaders who are thinking about okay, what do we do, how do we invest, is there going to be a return on investment? So I think as data science leaders, you have a responsibility to answer them as well as to your team as to how do we plan ahead. So how do you approach this? Do you have a framework to fall back on, or how do you approach this exercise?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a framework, but I can tell you how we've approached it, and I can tell you also that I'm not totally satisfied with how we've approached it. So that's one area where we need to keep improving.
Okay.
But I think one general principle is that when there's a lot of uncertainty, it pays to make small bets, right? And
Okay.
see how those bets pay off. So, just because there's I think a lot of people have not really in depth answered the question of like how much return is possible from these things in specific
Right.
situations.
Right.
So, if you're uncertain, you can just run a small pilot project, right?
Right.
Or maybe like 4 or 5 small pilot projects, depending on how big your team is.
Right.
And just, you basically know that you're investing some money in terms of time into some potential avenues that may not lead anywhere.
Right.
But don't put an emphasis that this project is going to deliver these huge wins, because you don't know.
Right.
And it's often better to set low expectations and then to exceed them rather than the other way around.
Right.
So you could pursue pilot projects within specific low risk areas of your business.
Right.
And that was sort of Andrew Ng's like kind of famous statements he made, right? He's like, start in a small problem,
Right.
get a win, and then start snowballing from there, right? And I think
Right.
that applies equally well here, right? Start with something small, that see what you learn. You will learn a lot in using the technologies that will guide then your next investments, should you choose to make them.
Right.
The second thing is, what we did specifically is we actually ran like a little hackathon, and
Okay.
everybody on the team was able to come up with ideas for how to use LLMs, and
Right.
we spent 1 week
Okay.
just building out these pilot projects. And it was really interesting. We got the CEO and the chief revenue officer to come be the judges of the data science hackathon, where we used
Nice.
these LLMs. So that was good for visibility as well. But we learned a lot just in hacking about the shortcomings of the
Okay.
tool and what was
Right.
difficult. And I think if you're developing projects, that should be a main part of the project is
Right.
documenting what you're learning
Right.
in using technologies. And then you could potentially do a second round of brainstorming and say, okay, based on what we learned in our opportunities at the company, what types of pilot projects should we pursue next? And you make another sort of small investment and see how that plays out.
Right.
Another thing that you can do, right, is allocate some time where everybody is free to use these tools.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that that's going to lead to success.
Okay.
However, I think you need to balance between sort of exploration and exploitation, right? And you could potentially have some free room to let people experiment and see what's going to come up. But I don't recommend that be a large portion of your strategy. I think that could be
Right.
like a really, really, really small portion. And you
Right.
might even select only a few people on your team to do this type of thing. But
Right.
I'm not a proponent of sort of like have 20% of your time to explore free projects. I think that leads to more, in my opinion, that could lead to more waste than benefit.
Right. So again, I think a secondary question to that is, have you identified like good problems to solve, or obviously we have seen a number of wrappers over these open source models that we see. Either it's the OpenAIs or Anthropics or so is there any good application like you've actually pinpointed that is interesting, or yeah, or if it's company secret, no worries, but yeah.
No, I think that maybe personally the best
Okay.
applications, I have seen are all of the chats gone wrong, where you see how poorly these things respond in particular
Right.
situations. I think there was an example the other day where somebody jailbroke like a car sort
Uh,
of
uh,
seller's chat and
right.
got them to sell cars for like $1 or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, yeah, but just give the answer as the same thing for, and it's legally binding. Yeah,
Right.
so
That was personally very valuable for me. I think we haven't really pursued many projects very far, although different
right,
teams are working on it.
right,
I think honestly, the personal assistant is one of the most valuable for data scientists, just in
Right.
terms of helping to come up with code very quickly,
Definitely.
helping to debug. So the sort of personal, making somebody more efficient or
Efficient.
productive, to me is I think uh, a groundbreaking use of the technology, and I think the split is going to be between people who know how to use these skills to do their
Right.
job better and people who don't know how to use these technologies. And
Right.
there's going to be a large gulf between people who know how to use them and people who don't, because the people who
Right.
do know how to use them are going to become so much more productive and so much
Right.
faster.
Right.
And but I can't speak specifically to any use case
Right.
outside of that.
No, absolutely. That's actually a great answer, because it's if anyone says that we have a running model ready and everything, that's going to be very suspicious, I guess. But yeah, thank you so much, Luigi. I think this was a brilliant session, geared towards senior data scientists who are trying to probably get into management, or uh, people who are starting as data science managers. I think this would be super useful to them. Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and yeah, happy holidays.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, Harini. I really appreciated being here, and you asked some great questions. So I hope that listeners find this valuable.
Thank you. Oh, I've actually forgot. I am asking one last question to every guest here. What is your favorite product? If that was the question.
My,
What is your
my fa-
favorite product ever? Because it's a product bulb
hmm,
podcast. Yeah.
sure. My
It should
favorite
not be
product.
your company. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. My favorite product. It's a little hard for me to answer that because I'm I'm not a very sort of like I don't love things. I like
Okay.
experiences.
No, like
Maybe
yeah,
that's not.
like any
I think
tech product or anything.
yeah, I think probably my favorite um, technology experience is probably shopping on Amazon. I
Ah,
think
excellent.
I think they've just nailed it, and it's just so easy to find things you want. It's really easy to find things you don't need, uh, but
Absolutely.
but are attractive, and they just made the entire experience. I'm just always blown away by when I buy a lot of books, and
Right.
when I think like, oh, I really want to get this book, and I do what is equivalent to just moving my thumb around, and then somebody walks up to my door with the book.
Right.
That to me is an absolutely amazing experience, and they really deserve all the money they're getting because it's just so perfect.
Mind blowing. No, this is brilliant. The guest before you, he answered it as LinkedIn. So yeah, two amazing answers, and I totally agree. I actually just saw your another podcast where I think you were the host, where you talked about Amazon's backward thinking
Mm-hmm.
strategy. I think that is an amazing or a really powerful tool for product managers, I guess. So, anyone listening out there should take
Yeah,
Luigi's advice.
yeah, I definitely recommend the book Working Backwards,
Right,
um, written by some former executives at Amazon. I
right.
recommend you use Amazon to buy the book about Amazon.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No better way. No, awesome. Thank you so much, Luigi. This was brilliant.
thanks, Rini.
All right. All right. Bye bye.